Good evening. Your Eminence, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, members of Andreas' family, members of the Hellenic Center, and friends of the Hellenic Center, welcome. Although almost 14 years ago, the Hellenic Community Trust decided to hold a biennial lecture in memory of our first chairman, Andreas David. With this lecture, always delivered by an internationally known and respected speaker, we aim to remember and celebrate his life. This is our 7th biennial lecture. The previous lectures explored areas of conflict, mainly, and potential conflict in the British Commonwealth, the Middle East, the Balkans, Eastern Mediterranean, Korea, and of governance generally. Our last lecture examined the relationship between mankind and God's creation, quite a departure from our normal subjects. This 7th lecture, we turn to economic problems, those which we face today and which have a drastic effect on ourselves, on our children, and I'm sure on our grandchildren, the way we're going. For our speaker, we have the distinguished economist, Professor Sir Richard Pissarides. But first I would like to say a few words about Andreas David, who together with his wife, Mitzi, and the rest of the Leventis family helped to create this incredible center where we are today. Andreas was born in Cyprus, where he received his early education. He went to secondary school in Wales, and from there to Trinity College, Dublin, from where he graduated with a degree in business and commerce. While there, he really took full part in everything the university had to offer: social life, athletic life, of course, as well as his work. While he was there, mad keen on football as he was, he captained his university team and played for the combined universities. These were interests which he carried on throughout his life, and where in this building we had many an opportunity to savor his passion for these things. He started his business career in Ghana in a small Coca-Cola bottling plant owned by his uncle, Anastasios Leventis. It was there, in this small plant, where, as he was often saying to us, he caught the Coca-Cola bug. He went on to build the Coca-Cola business in Nigeria, a big success for him and the whole family, which gave him the confidence to acquire the Coca-Cola franchise in Ireland and then in Greece, both countries for which he felt culturally and emotionally attached. The success of these two franchises gave Andrea the confidence to negotiate Coca-Cola franchises in the Balkans, in Eastern Europe, and in Russia, as far as Siberia. While all this was going on, all these negotiations were going on, he found enough time to head our fundraising team and to become the first chairman of our trust. His involvement and that of the rest of the Leventis family gave both individuals and corporations the confidence to make major donations to us for the establishment of this center, for which we will always be grateful. It was Andreas' dream to make the family business, in Coca-Cola's speech, an anchor bottler, that is, a very large bottler which is financially sound, managerially strong, and multi-country, and thus a significant partner for the Atlanta-based Coca-Cola company. Well, he achieved this 14 years ago by merging the Hellenic Bottling Company with the Central European bottler of Coca-Cola and established Coca-Cola Hellenic Bottling Company, which was at the time the second largest bottler of Coca-Cola in the world after the Coca-Cola company itself. Sadly, after chairing the first meeting of the board of the new company, he succumbed to cancer from which he suffered for the past 3.5 years. Andreas was also a very active supporter of the Orthodox Church and of charities in Nigeria. He felt deeply honored when he was made Archon by His All Holiness the Ecumenical Patriarch and a chief later, Babalaja's chief of the ancient nation of Eqbaland of some 20 million people in southwest Nigeria. He died on the 16th of October 2000. We still miss him very much in this center. Walking around the corridors, we still, every now and again, when we think of him, smell his cigar, which he shouldn't have been smoking, but he always broke the rules. And always remember his animated discussions on football and his determination to beat us all at backgammon. As I said earlier, our speaker tonight is Professor Sir Christopher Pissarides. Sir Christopher is the Regius Professor of Economics at the London School of Economics and Political Science, where he received his PhD and where he stayed for the bulk of his career. He's still the chairman of the LSE Centre for Macroeconomics. During his career at the LSE, he spent long visits to the US universities of Harvard, Princeton, and California at Berkeley. He is now Professor of European Studies at the University of Cyprus and Chairman of the Council of National Economy of the Republic of Cyprus. He's also Professor at Large of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Sir Christopher was born in the village of Agros, high up in the Troodos Mountains of Cyprus. He came to England for his university education and stayed here ever since then, becoming a member of the Greek Cypriot community. He is one of the founder members of the Hellenic Community Trust and the Hellenic Centre, of which he is a trustee. He is one of us. Sir Christopher is best known for his contributions to the search and matching theory, for studying the interactions between the labour market and the macroeconomy. He has also done research on structural change and growth. He has written extensively, and his book, Equilibrium Unemployment Theory, is an influential reference in the economics of underemployment. It has been translated into many languages and forms part of the core of most university libraries in economics. He is frequently quoted in the press on issues concerning the Eurozone and the future of European integration. Among the many awards and honours bestowed on him are elected Fellow of the British Academy, of the Academy of Athens, Academia Europaea, the European Economic Association, of which he was president in 2011, a lifetime honorary member of the American Economic Association. He received the Eisner Prize in Labour Economics, jointly with Dale Mortensen, a long-time cooperator of his from America, with whom he also shared the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2010, together with Peter Diamond of MIT. And the citation was for analysis of markets with search frictions. I'm sure some of you will understand what that means. I certainly don't. In 2011, he received the Grand Cross of the Republic of Cyprus, being the highest honor the Republic can bestow on anyone. And as we said, in 2013, in the birthday honors, he was knighted by Her Majesty the Queen. For those who wish to know even more than I have to say about Professor Pissarides, also Sir Christopher, you can look at the the flyers which we left on your seats, and of course, there's always the internet, where we all have to go nowadays for everything. At this stage, I would like to call upon Sir Christopher to come to address us on his subject, which is the Euro crisis. Is it ending, and what does the future hold? Christopher.
Distinguished guests, members of the family, friends. I was saying it gives me great pleasure to be giving this lecture and remembering Andreas this evening, because I gave the Leventis lecture last year at the University of Cyprus, which was also a good event. I had the pleasure of meeting most of the members of the family on that occasion as well. So I look forward to talking to you about this and to getting your reactions at the end. As usual, it's very difficult to stop an economist from talking when they talk about subjects they feel very strongly about, and the Eurozone is certainly one that I feel very strongly about. I will try and restrict this as much as possible. I'm afraid I try to remove all the technical slides and topics from it so that we concentrate and focus more on the policy-oriented things. But still, being an academic economist, I cannot talk about controversial things without at least referring to some of the evidence, so I'm going to do that. And let me then begin. Well, first of all, since I'm going to say some negative things later on, let me make it clear from the beginning that I do think the European Union was a great idea, and I think it can still become greater. I'm rather disappointed to see David Cameron and this government talk as if it's taken as given that they would exit. I think exiting the European Union would be a disaster, in fact, for Britain, unless they're very lucky and they get the same rights from the outside, which I very much doubt. But anyway, that's a different topic, maybe on another occasion. I summarized here in bullet point form things that I think have been good for Europe. I mean, let's not forget that the European Union was initially set up to bring peace to Europe, and it's certainly done that. I mean, now there are almost no borders within Europe, and remember that the process to set it up started only less than 10 years after the end of the Second World War. It has been good for jobs and growth, especially the single market and free trade. That was in the 1980s and 1990s, early 90s. And especially for the countries that were falling behind, like Spain, Portugal, and Greece, and the new democracies. It was thought in the 1990s that we've solved all the problems with the structure of the economy, so it was time to move on to something new, and driven mainly by people like Jacques Delors, great European leaders like Jacques Delors, Giscard d'Estaing, Helmut Schmidt. They thought of introducing a new currency and having a complete merger of monetary policy, which at the time seemed to be a good idea, but of course there were no crises then. We were going through what the Americans call the Great Moderation, where there are no sort of big ups and downs in the economy, at least not in the economy of advanced countries. We had the Asian crisis and the Russian crisis, but those didn't really have many implications for Europe. And what we discovered with the recent crisis, the 2008 one, which was the first one to hit the United States and Europe and the other advanced countries, was that there were really too many weaknesses in the European economy to be even contemplating a common currency when they did in the 1990s. And what I want to say tonight is that there are ways of making it work. They're going to be tough, but unfortunately we're not following those ways to make it work. We're following ways that are not very helpful in restoring confidence in the currency. I mean, that would be the sort of catch point. Now you can see here, now I'm going to show you here some slides of data from the OECD, essentially the club of the advanced countries, where you will see that the countries of the Eurozone are the ones always at the laggard, products. They are always the ones on the left. Like here you see the change in GDP, economic growth in other words, in the 6 years between 2007, just before the crisis, in 2013, when the crisis was supposed to have ended for most countries. And of course, I mean, no one could catch up with China. You can see an almost 70% rise in living standards in those 6 years. But if you go to the left, you can see in Greece, it's something close to 25% fall in real living standards, and all the countries in red are the Eurozone countries. And with the exception of countries like Slovakia and Malta that were so far behind, and they're still so far behind, they grew a little. But everyone else was either stagnant or deteriorating in economic condition in these 6 countries. And the important thing is that they're the only ones that are in that state. You know, everyone else has overcome the recession. You can see it showing up in unemployment, again in red are the countries that are now under MOU, they all suffer the high unemployment rates, whereas you have countries like Korea, Japan, I'm not sure which country is HE actually, probably Switzerland. Having unemployment rates around 5%, and then Greece, Spain, having more than 25%, and so on. And you can also see even more starkly in youth unemployment, where you can see it's 50% in the MOU countries, and in the other ones like Cyprus and even Italy, which effectively is going through an MOU type situation, approaching 40%. Now obviously, and final slide of evidence I want to show you is probably the most telling actually, given what I'm going to say later on. It's it's what happened in these countries in the last decade and a bit. Where they were in 2002, which is the light blue color here, in relation to the average of the European Union, then where they were just before the crisis and where they are now, the latest data. And you can see in 2002, between 2002 and 2007, hardly anything happened to Germany that I used as the example of the more advanced economy. Whereas the other countries, Ireland, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and so on, what they call the periphery, living standards were rising, except for Italy, which has been, I mean, Italy has many more problems than anyone else actually in the European Union, I think, anyway. But you can see Spain, Portugal, Greece, they were up there, but then all those gains that they had reversed in relation to the average, reversed up to 2013. So coming down, except for Germany, where things have improved since 2013, and I'm going to explain where I think that's what that is due to. Okay, now what should be done about the situation? Well, the situation is obviously very satisfactory now. Not only the economic situation that I've just shown you, but the political situation is very satisfactory, because what we have now is a Europe that is divided between creditors and debtors. Instead of being partners, some of us borrow from the other ones, and they behave like the debtors that impose conditions on us. They're always saying there's conditionality to the loans. That's not the idea of a union. We're developing a strong and weak, and because of that deep financial need and the lending, we have one country, especially, but maybe some others as well associated with it, imposing its wishes on other countries. You know, and imposing is the word. It's not by mutual agreement. If you ask them, they'll say, "Oh, they all agreed." Well, of course they agreed, because they had their arms twisted behind closed doors. I mean, what can you do other than agree? So I fear that the current political situation is really risking destroying the good things about Europe that we built up. I'm not saying we're going to go back into civil war, but I think this hostility that countries are feeling for each other will carry on for many years to come, and they're always going to be an obstacle to further integration. And we have to do something about it. The single currency is obviously not working as it is now, and as I put it there should either be more Europe, more integration to make it work, or less Europe, which is effectively dismantling the currency, and that was debated at the time, 2010, 2012, but it was decided that they wouldn't do it. I don't think the euro is at risk now. I think it's secure. In which case, the only way we can make it work is what I say. I don't know how it got so far actually. It went right to the end. No, here we are. It's what I say here, that we should be having more euro because it was decided and it was implemented in 2012 was a sort of critical year that no country should leave the euro. And in contrast to that, more countries should be encouraged to come in. And in fact, one country did come in. By coincidence, a few weeks before they came in, it was one of the Baltic republics. I can't remember actually which one it was. The governor of the central bank came to the LSE to give a lecture, and I said to him, "What makes you want to join this currency?" I said to him, "Can't you see what the countries inside are doing?" And he said, "No, we're going to be different." He said, "Wait and see." So I don't know. We'll wait and see. I mean, countries are still running to it. He liked the idea of not having exchange rate uncertainty against Germany, which I don't see any problems with that, but he saw it differently. All right, so now in order to come up with solutions, we need to ask, what kind of crisis are we having and how did we get here? And this is where I should really be going fast. I should learn to talk fast here because there are a lot of slides like this. I have a lot of text in front of me, but it's not the important thing that I want to get to. Okay, now the first thing I want to say, and I'm convinced about that actually, is that the current crisis is not a crisis in labor markets, which is presented like that, especially by Germany is presented like that. In fact, last June, I was at the Bundesbank and I gave a lecture and I had this kind of claim inside, and Jens Weidmann, the president of the Bundesbank, was there, and he said to me, no, this is wrong. I mean, it's a line Germany has been following, but I just don't agree with that when you look at the statistics. It's a crisis of managing a single currency when the criteria for the criteria that you need to satisfy to have a common currency are not satisfied. I mean, it's like taking 10 partners who have diverse interests. You make them members of a club that has a single interest, and then you don't know how to manage the policy of that club because the members have disagreements, and you need to come to some kind of compromise. And I believe that the compromises we're coming to are the wrong ones. We're mismanaging the currency because there is one very powerful member within the club who ultimately imposes her wishes on everyone else. That's basically where I think the crisis is due to. At least the crisis now, I mean, not the beginnings of the crisis, but the crisis that we're facing now. Now, what the single currency, the crisis we have now is a crisis that started as a debt crisis. A crisis. It's a crisis where countries have different levels of debt. So how do you manage your debt when you have a single currency? The importance about the single currency is that exchange rates are fixed for what we call in economics small economies. A small economy is one that cannot influence the aggregate outcome of the club. For example, Italy is a small economy because it can do nothing to the euro. They can bang and shout and do whatever. The euro will not move because the Italian prime minister said something. But Germany could move the euro. Germany, in fact, is the only country within the eurozone currently that is not a small economy. It can influence the value of the currency. But the other countries cannot. So effectively what we have is a union of countries that have fixed their exchange rates. So monetary policy doesn't have that tool. And they're trying to find other ways of managing their countries or of managing this union when the exchange rate tool is out, with the exception of Germany, who is able to change the exchange rate. Of course, the European Central Bank can do it, but that's a central bank, it's not a single country. And I'll come back to what they are doing. Now, now let me say, when I say that the crisis is not a crisis in labor markets, structure of labor markets, that's not saying, it's not the same thing as saying that our labor markets in Europe are fine and you shouldn't do anything about them. In fact, our labor markets are not in good condition in Europe, and something has to be done about them. And some countries have reformed with great successes. The South obviously hasn't. You know, the first country that reformed was the United Kingdom, starting in the 1980s. Then it continued under the Blair administration in the 90s, and now it's one of the best performing labor markets in Europe. The Netherlands reformed in the late 1980s, early 1990s. It's one of the best performing labor markets in Europe. They did the same thing. They did something very similar to what Britain did, but in a much more cooperative way. There were no handbags or silver spoons hitting each other in the Netherlands. Germany reformed in 2002-2005, again in a much more cooperative way, under Schroeder, what's known as the Hartz reforms, and all credit to Mrs. Merkel for enjoying the fruits of her opponents, because as soon as the poor chancellor managed to reform the economy, then he lost the election and Merkel got elected, and then when the good things about the reforms came up, she was in power, so she's been voted into office year in, year out. More recently, I mean, of the countries of the peripheral south is known that have reformed. I think Spain is the one that's gone furthest, but it looks like they're going to lose the election as well. In fact, I did say in one lecture which had politicians there that it seems to be inevitable that the political leaders who are brave enough to go through the reforms will lose the next election, because the transition to implementing the reforms and getting to the new state are too painful for people. And it's what Renzi in Italy is trying to do now, I believe with very, very small steps. But his popularity is already going down, so I don't know whether he will get there or not. And it's certainly not what Greece has done, despite the many good things that Mr. Samaras has done. I mean, they had some legislation reforming labor markets, but no implementation that you can see in the statistics yet. Now, so having said that, as a sort of caveat, you know, we do need to reform our labor markets, but I'm not talking about the crisis in the Eurozone crisis, but that's not the problem in the Eurozone crisis. The problem is mismanagement. What the reform of the labor markets will do, they will raise what we call potential output, the potential rate of growth. You know, now if everything is good in Europe now, we'll probably grow at about 1.5%, not more. When everything is good in the United States, they grow at 2.5% because they have a better labor market than we have. If we reform our labor markets, we'll manage to grow in better times at maybe more than 2.5%. But the negative numbers we have now are due to mismanagement. Okay, so having lost the exchange rate tool, what happens if you get hit by recession, by crisis? Well, in theory, there are two automatic stabilizers in any economic union. One of them is migration, which effectively what it says is that if a country has high unemployment and another country has low unemployment, then the unemployed should move out of that country and move to the one of the low unemployment, so you equalize them. That's one automatic stabilizer. The other automatic stabilizer is a fiscal transfer, which again effectively what it says is that if one country does worse than the other, then the one that does better should give money to the one that does worse to equalize again the situation between the two countries. Now they're supposed to be automatic. They're supposed to be built into an economic union. Now, are they successful in Europe? Well, they're not. First of all, migration. Well, Europeans, they don't like to move. I mean, they live in wealthy countries, even if they go through recession. They prefer living in the country they were born. There's language, there are cultural problems. There is some mobility, but not enough to equalize economic situations. When we do see mobility, in fact, we see it taking at the wrong end of the skills distribution. It's the skilled people who move, the ones that are needed most in recession countries, whereas the theory says that it's the unskilled people who should move. to where the jobs are. In other words, if you take the Greek situation today, what the automatic stabilizer says is that lots of the unemployed Greeks with low education, low skills should move to Germany and work in German industry, and the more qualified, highly qualified Greeks should stay in Greece and revive the economy. It's not what's happening. So that doesn't work. Now, what about fiscal transfers? Well, in Europe they couldn't do it because they are not allowed by the Maastricht Treaty. Some countries have broken the Maastricht Treaty, but not by very much. But anyway, you are not allowed to use fiscal transfers in Europe. It was specifically written into treaties. And therefore, we need different policies. We need policies because the automatic stabilizers don't work. And what policies do we need? Well, to answer that question, we need to ask, why do we need the different policies? And the answer as to why we need the different policies here, in my view at least, is that it's really, I think the answer is fairly simple. It's basically because of the different role of construction in our countries. That's where it all started. I should backtrack slightly actually and tell you something because it's relevant in history. When I say that fiscal transfers are not allowed by the Maastricht Treaty, there are two famous examples where fiscal transfers, historical examples, where fiscal transfers brought about mutual benefits and growth and peace that happened automatically. One is in the United States, after the Civil War, when the South was destroyed and the West hadn't been opened up. Effectively, the way that the West was opened up and the South reconstructed was with East Coast money going through the federal government. All the railways, the canals for watering California, they were all built with federal money. And of course, the only ones who could afford to pay taxes into the federal government at the time was the East Coast. So that was an automatic stabilizer, that the federal government acted as an agent, if you like, for moving money between states. And the other famous and more recent example is East Germany and West Germany. When the two Germanies united after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were huge transfers of money from the West to the East to support an overvalued currency and to update their industry. And that has been very successful, of course, as well. That's the kind of thing that we need here. The other example that was pointed by an American Harvard professor, in fact, to me recently, is German reconstruction after the war, after the Second World War, when their debt was forgiven and huge transfers from the United States through the Marshall Plan to Germany to reconstruct. But that was done for political reasons, obviously, whereas in the other two cases it was done because the members of the Union, the United States and Germany, felt as one nation, something that we don't have in Europe. Okay, so then go back to this. And now, you see, once you don't have the exchange rate to bring your economies back to equilibrium, and you don't have the automatic stabilizers working, then the only way you can make your countries in a union work is to make sure the countries have similar policy requirements, is to bring them into such a situation that one size fits all. That's not where we are in Europe now, and I think the reason we are not in that situation now in Europe is because we're at different stages of economic development, and in some countries construction plays a much bigger role than in other countries. I think, yeah, here is the size of the construction sector in each country. You can see Ireland, Spain, they have construction sectors of about 13% of their economy. Then if you go back, Netherlands, Germany, France, they have construction sectors of just over 6% of their economy. So we're talking about twice as big construction sectors in the countries on the right as the countries on the left. Now with red, you see the countries that went through an MOU, and you can see that in Cyprus, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, our countries with extremely large construction sectors. Greece is the exception. It is large, it's about 9%, but Greece it's a country that has other problems, like borrowing and consuming instead of borrowing and investing, which is what you're supposed to do with borrowed money. Now you might say, what about Latvia and Estonia? Well, these are new countries that had to rebuild their economies after this. So their construction sectors had to be big. Whereas in the other countries, it was more of a speculative thing. Now, why is construction so important, I'm saying? Well, it's important because the crisis, the 2008 crisis, started in housing markets. And housing markets internationally collapsed. And therefore, the countries that have the bigger construction sectors got hit by a bigger shock than the countries with smaller construction sectors, like Spain, Ireland, and Cyprus got twice as big a shock as the other countries. Now, what are the implications of that? Well, most of that construction boom was based on borrowed money from banks. Therefore, banks had to deal with non-performing loans. That would have led to their collapse of the banking system, which would have had much more serious implications for the economy than the collapse of the construction sector. Therefore, their governments tried to rescue them by capitalizing them. And that led to a very big rise in debt in the countries that I pointed out before, and finally exclusion from international markets, and therefore appeal to your partners to help you. And then because they had the big rise in debt here to capitalize their banks, they followed contractionary fiscal policies to avoid having the debt shooting up even more. And therefore you had a negative fiscal shock, reinforcing the negative construction and debt shock here. So if you put them all together, then what you have is that the countries that started off with large speculative construction sectors ended up with large debts and contractionary fiscal policy, and therefore a much bigger, like a multiplier effect on the crisis that led them into the situation that they just couldn't help themselves anymore. But why couldn't they help themselves? What correction mechanisms could there be? Well, they couldn't help themselves because they didn't have the flexible exchange rates. What happens in that situation if you have flexible exchange rates? I mean, suppose we were not in the euro and we were faced with that. What you would face would be a large depreciation of your currency, your own currency against your trading partners. Then what a big debt would do in that situation would be to force fiscal tightening, like they did anyway, but combine that with monetary loosening if you have your own central bank. In other words, the central bank puts liquidity into the system, and the central government takes that back to some extent through taxation to pay for the debts. And what that does to the exchange rate is to depreciate it further. You lose, 30-40% of the value of your currency when it's big. But of course, what that does is that it makes your exports cheaper, it makes imports more expensive, you switch to domestic production. Everyone suffers a fall in living standards because all foreign goods are more expensive. That's a real cost to you. But you get back into balance and you start growing again. It's painful, but not too painful to correct your economy that way. Now, what happens if you have fixed exchange rates? You're cut off from that tool. You could try and mimic it by having the European Central Bank, for example, expand, but they don't do it. They haven't done it. In the absence of that corrective mechanism, what you have? Well, you're left with only one alternative, is what's known as internal depreciation, which effectively means you cut your costs domestically so that you make your exports more attractive, and you switch to domestic consumption because your goods are cheaper than foreign goods. Now, how do you cut your costs? Well, capital costs in Europe are practically zero. I mean, that's one good thing that the European Central Bank did. I don't think it had much of a choice anyway, because the rest of the world was going to zero interest rates, but they are zero. In fact, now they're even negative. Was that enough? It obviously wasn't enough to cut your costs. What you needed to do in addition was to cut wages, cut labor costs. How do you cut labor costs? How do you persuade unions to cut labor costs? Only by using unemployment as a threat. So you have to see unemployment rise, which will bring wages down, and it's exactly what we saw. These are the countries that needed to go through internal devaluations. And look at the change in the unemployment rates from just before the crisis to the height of the debt crisis up there. Spain, Greece, Cyprus, Ireland suffered the biggest rise in unemployment, Lithuania, Portugal, whereas other countries down here that didn't have that debt problem suffered no rises in unemployment. Germany, in fact, had a fall in unemployment during the same time. So that's one big cost of the new policy. The internal depreciation. Now, did countries, did that bring internal depreciation? The answer is that yes, it did. In that nominal and real wages fell, and especially in Greece. Greece, in fact, I'm sure from now on is going to be a textbook example in economics of what happens when you have internal depreciation, when you have a fixed exchange rate and you get this crisis, because it really followed the textbook route as to what you might use instead of a flexible exchange rate. Where things went wrong, however, was that it didn't work. And that's why I'm saying it's going to be in textbooks from now on. Now, this is what happened to real earnings. If we have real average, these are average, they are not just public sector or anything like that. It's the average for the economy as a whole. If we have real earnings of 100 in 2009, then by 2012, Ireland was down to 97, Italy 97.9, they do have big problems. They can't even reduce wages. Spain 96.8, Portugal 93.82, and if you put it relative to Germany, you can see the big falls that took place there. This is precisely what we mean by internal depreciation, a fall in labor costs. Now, did they bring the right results? Well, the answer is no, and it's quite amazing in that if you completely ignore the economics, I'm not sure if my economic colleagues here will agree, but if you completely ignore the new economic theories post Milton Friedman, you know, I mean, say you went to sleep in 1970 and you woke up suddenly and you saw what was happening in Greece, you would be able to explain everything like the textbook says. But if you were steeped into classical economics and new classical economics and Chicago economics, you would get it all wrong. And I'm afraid central bankers nowadays are trained in places like the University of Chicago in Minnesota rather than the London School of Economics. So. Or if they are trained at the London School of Economics, they're taught by people who were trained in Chicago and Minnesota. Because what happened in Greece was precisely the way that Keynes described the situation in the Great Depression in the 1930s. In that debt brings fiscal tightening, which reduces aggregate demand. The shock to construction brings a big fall in aggregate demand because of the need for people to save to repay their loans and so on, and because economic activity is down. Debt brings fiscal contraction in addition, so that's added on to the second one. And then the internal depreciation reduces aggregate demand further because when you cut wages, it has two effects. The one is the cost of labor effect, and the other is the demand effect. The worker who suffers a near 20% fall in his wages will consume less because he's got less money to spend, but he will be cheaper labor to use by the employer. But the effect that dominated in the case of Greece and the others, in fact, was the fall in demand by the worker, not the fall in the costs by the employer. And that's why you see, even now, the Financial Times almost every other day will have big title, "How can Europe restore demand?" Well, we brought demand down to where it is now, and now we're wondering how we're going to restore it. But that's the key problem that we're faced with. Now, the problem again is that in Greece things didn't work. It is not the labor market. I don't have data for Greece over here, but I can compare the two countries that Spain, which is at the extreme of the rigidity of labor markets before the reform, but the reform is only just beginning to have an impact. Ireland, in fact, has an extremely flexible labour market. The labour market of Ireland is as good as the one of the UK. Now, if it was the case that the reason that internal depreciations didn't work is the labour market rigidity, which is something that is said all the time by German policymakers. Schäuble is making that point all the time. And Weidmann as well, except that he doesn't talk in public very much, but he does make it to the European Central Bank. Then the labour market aggregates of Spain should be much worse than the ones of Ireland. But in fact, they're almost identical. This is a response to the depression. In 2000, if we normalize that in 2007, they both had employment equal to 100, you can see their path in the recession after 2012. Ireland, as we know, came out of recession before Spain. This is where they deviated. Maybe this is due to their flexibility, but Spain is already turning up here as well this year. I mean, next year, this yellow line will go up as well. The problem is the mismanagement we're following, and this is what I want to turn to now. That how do we get out of this situation? Well, we have to find other policies that will work. I mean, obviously, what we've been doing so far, it's just not working, and you can come up with many possibilities. I think the strongest ones are more expansionary monetary policy, what they call unconventional monetary policy, which has been long overdue here. We could have more fiscal transfers of the kind that East and West Germany had after the fall of the Berlin Wall. We could have debt restructuring, and I'm going to talk in more detail about what I mean by debt restructuring. Okay, so let's first talk about monetary policy. What's the European Central Bank doing? Well, the European Central Bank is following a policy which is expansionary because interest rates are practically zero now. But the question is it expansionary enough? They have a target of inflation of 2%, or just under 2%. And they claim that they don't have any unemployment target or any target of living of GDP. Their only target is inflation. Now, inflation in Germany, the booming economy of the Eurozone, is 0.8% instead of 2%. In the southern periphery, the average is negative, it's deflation. In the Eurozone as a whole, which is the number they're supposed to be looking at, is 0.4%. They're obviously not doing enough. This number could drop below 2 substantially, say 1 or 2 years, but then the ECB is supposed to take action to bring it back if they're going to have credibility in what they're doing. Now, Mr. Draghi keeps saying that they'll do whatever it takes. If you take him to his word, then it's like saying that they cannot influence inflation or deflation as a central bank. Well, that would be news to any student of economics, that the central bank cannot influence the rate of growth of prices. Throw what we call helicopter money into the economy, and it will do it. When you ask them why they don't do it, and I did ask that question when I was at the Bundesbank, Weidmann said that their forecast is that by 2016 or maybe 17, the inflation rate would be just under 2%. But it's now 2014. I mean, wait another 3 years in this deflationary situation with high debts. The problem with deflation is that it makes your debt worse because the debt is fixed in nominal terms. It's an amount of money you owe. And when there's deflation, your wages don't rise, prices don't rise, and therefore the value of the debt stays high. And if it's negative, if we have minus, then it becomes higher. The question is, how do we service these debts with deflation? Well, that's something that, as I was saying, the press, like the Financial Times, keep writing all the time. We need to do something about deflation. I think it's the big risk in the Eurozone still, despite what they're saying. In my view, actually, to tell you what I think after the deliberation is that they are going to do something about it, but they're just delaying it. I don't think they can get away with just sitting back and waiting. There will be unconventional policies, and they're introducing them little by little. The economy is reacting well, but if you see what what the German council member and others are saying now is that they are thinking that maybe they should be doing something more. I think they're going to do it. I don't think they're going to wait until 2017, but we'll have to wait and see when it might be done. If you look at these figures here, though, they're obviously following their own policy, and it's obviously very difficult to follow a policy that would be good both for Germany and the southern periphery, but at least fix this average number first and then think about the other two. Now, what about more fiscal transfers? As I was saying, fiscal transfers are not allowed by the Maastricht Treaty. And in fact, now countries are becoming more strict about Maastricht, that they should be followed. In fact, Germany was the first country that broke the Maastricht criteria. It's almost apologetic that they did it, and they're saying, countries should follow it now. But instead what they're doing is that they're trying to introduce fiscal transfers through what I call here the back door, doing it quietly. The European Investment Bank, for example, has given lots of money to invest in crisis countries, and they have been successful, in fact, in doing it. They're investing in small and medium-sized enterprises. They keep coming to Cyprus. In fact, the president of the bank is coming to Cyprus, not some low-level delegation, every 3 months to see what they're doing. It's a good way of doing it. But the European Investment Bank is not supposed to take countries out of recession. I mean, it doesn't have enough money, even if you give them more money. I wish they would give them more. I fully trust them in what they're doing. They are very good. I have to show some, what is it called? Not conflict of interest. I do belong to their scientific council. That's not the reason I'm praising them. They are good in their investments too. But it's not enough. They're helping small and medium-sized enterprises, but that's it. Now, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is getting interested now in our countries, whereas their remit was just to work with countries of the former Soviet Union and the new democracies, but in fact now, they're already investing substantially in Cyprus, for example. And they do send high-level delegations as well. Those two, in fact, are the best recent initiatives that I've come across in these countries, in our countries. The Youth Guarantee was a very good initiative. What the Youth Guarantee did is that it guaranteed that no young person would be unemployed for more than 3 months before he's offered either a job or a training program. But they make the conditions for claiming it so stringent that, as far as I know, no country has claimed any money yet from the Youth Guarantee budget. France was close to having one project approved, and I don't know, maybe they did it, but I've certainly been no money coming to Cyprus at all from the Youth Guarantee program, although Cyprus does qualify on the principles that they were set out. Mrs. Merkel made the famous statement that, well, if you cannot get a Youth Guarantee program to help in your own country, then send your people to Germany to go to our apprentice program, but teach them German first, she said. Because you won't accept them without fluent German, because she said they won't be able to follow the apprentice program. That is. Now, the Barroso Commission made 180 billion euros available for infrastructure investments. Europe's infrastructure is crumbling, especially transport and energy. They're just terrible. They need loads of money. Britain actually as well falls into that category. We do need here loads of money for new energy, greening the economy and all that. That's what the Barroso initiative was supposed to do, but it didn't have an impact. Maybe the money wasn't enough. Juncker's big new initiative, the sort of honeymoon effect he's going through now, that he was given 300 billion euros to spend any way he wants, especially an infrastructure investment in Europe. This looks good actually, and the jury is still out. The money hasn't been spent yet, but it has been approved. Some people are very negative, especially the Financial Times. They're very negative about it, saying that you need to have matching funds in the countries that take this money. But if there is no money in the country, if there is no demand, no one will want to invest as much as the Commission will give you. So they suspect that the money will just sit there idle for many, many years. But we have to wait and see. But this is what I call a fiscal transfer through the back door. I mean, keep the money, forget about it. Why do you have to go through these elaborate mechanisms? That's all to preserve the integrity of the Maastricht Treaty. And in the meantime, as we're waiting for those projects to take place, the divergence keeps increasing. In 1999, when the euro was introduced, Germany was 22% above the European average, now they're at 25%. Italy from 11 above went to 5 below, Spain was on par, 5 below, Portugal from 85, 85, Greece 81, 75. I mean, the situation is very urgent, something needs to be done, and there it is. Now, why is there a policy vacuum? Why can't we agree on what economists say are the right policies? I mean, the reason basically is that European and national interests diverge. There's one thing needed in your own country and another thing needed in Europe as a whole. And when it comes down to it, national leaders will always follow national interests, not European, and that's because their power base is national, it's not European. I mean, European elections they've been taken more seriously, the recent ones, because it's an indication of how countries reacted to the new policies, not because it influenced the power base of the politicians. And where policies have to be common, as in monetary policy, then again, countries sitting in the Council of the European Central Bank argue on the basis of their national interests, and the strong dominate. Now, what do you do? Well, if you want European leaders of European nations to follow a more Europe-friendly policy, you need to increase their European power base. Maybe have elections that elect members with executive powers in Europe, rather than just the parliament that it does many good things, but ultimately it doesn't influence policy unless the Commission, which doesn't have European elected officers, agrees. Otherwise, if you retain the power in national elections, then you're going to get nowhere. We know, for example, that if you campaigning in Germany for what's good in Greece will lose your elections. That's basically what it is. So you're not going to do it. Now, what this is saying, of course, is that if we're going to fill that policy vacuum we have, and if we're going to have other pro-European policies, then either we have to change all the national interests to converge so that we all have the same national interests, or we have to have closer political union. With the way things are now, I don't see it happening. So the inevitable lesson that we draw from this is that we cannot have a successful economic union when we have countries with different structures if we are without more political union. I don't think it's going to happen, but that's in... I don't think we are going to have a closer political union, but that's it's kind of negative comment, if you like. I'm disappointed about the future of Europe because we are not going to have that. Now, is it possible now to start closer cooperation where we are, given that that we are not going to get European elections that will have more meaning than what we have now? Well, there are things we can do. Bring fiscal policy more out into the open. We know that countries with heavy debts, like the southern of Europe, cannot have the luxury of fiscal expansion because they have such high debts. They are controlled by the Troika anyway. Germany could have it. One proposal that I really like, I haven't been so specific in the past, but when I saw other people being specific, I thought, why not? Germany could follow more expansionary policy. It's suggested that they can afford 1% of the GDP, would be within the Maastricht criteria. There is pressure on them to do it, but instead what they're planning to do is to contract their fiscal policy next year to balance their budget. It's completely unnecessary. Why would a country want to balance its budget when the whole of the European Union is so deep in recession. You know, the whole idea of Maastricht, the reason it allows 3% deficit, is so that countries could push their deficit to 3% in times of recession, and then have a surplus when the economy is growing. Here we have a situation where Germany is not in recession, the Eurozone is in recession, and they are following a policy that is contracting their fiscal policy instead of expanding it. It's going against what the political union would have done. What about the European Central Bank? Well, it could act as a true central bank and get rid of deflation. I'm saying that I think they're going to do it, but there's certainly not. Now it's a lot of talk and no action. Finishing very shortly. Right? So, you know, let them buy sovereign bonds with fresh money. When you put this to them, they say we're not allowed to buy sovereign bonds by our constitution, but in fact, they are allowed to buy sovereign. Well, first of all, constitutions change. I mean, it's not that they were given by someone that we cannot do anything about. But then they're allowed to buy sovereign bonds in the secondary market, so they could always get a bank like the Deutsche Bank, tell them buy sovereign bonds as they're issued, and then we'll buy them from the secondary market. It would bypass the rule they have, but they're not. Again, Draghi keeps saying that they're going to do it. He said it, 3 weeks ago, that he was going to buy Cypriot and Greek bonds as well, but they haven't done it yet. So they should be doing more of that. What about debt? And this is probably my most controversial suggestion, that now you see the debts are fairly tolerable because interest rates are zero. They are, you know, we're not paying much interest on our debts, but when the Eurozone eventually recovers, even 5 years from now, the interest rates rise, there's no way that a country like Greece, Italy, even Cyprus, I would think, would be able to afford to pay their debt and grow at the same time. I mean, they're faced with perennial stagnation if the debt situation hasn't improved. And something needs to be done about that through help with the IMF and the ECB, the Commission. One obvious thing is to debt forgiveness. Now, there are many different ways you can do that actually, and I do think some of that will be done, because now people realize, the IMF especially, they realize that if Greece and Italy, the two countries with the big debt, are left in the current situation, when interest rates start to rise, they just be stuck. And at least Italy is at a high level. I mean, it has been coming down a little bit, but it's at a high level. It's a little bit like Japan. You may not notice it that they're stuck. But with Greece, the situation is desperate. There are ways of doing it. You know, one way of doing it, for example, is to issue them with very long-term debt, say debt that they can repay 60 years from now at fixed zero interest rate. It sounds crazy, but I think there is a very good chance that something like that will be done. It's a kind of forgiveness, you know. I mean, here is money to spend and give it back to us 60 years from now. I mean, who's going to be around in 60 years to worry about it? Another way, of course, is to get a haircut, a more selective haircut than last time. Do you want me to throw a cat amongst the pigeons? I was told only today the Syriza debt reduction program, and it's just not going to work. Which involves it involves the European Central Bank doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. I'm very worried by what I heard, actually. Conclusions. To make the euro work, that we need close political cooperation. The steps we're taking so far are weak. The situation is very bleak, especially on the debt and in what happens with the labor markets. And on the debt situation, I mean, you know, I don't know if there are many rumors of what was said when their economists visited 2 weeks ago, but what I heard is not the debt forgiveness that I mean here, just in case someone thinks that I'm aligning with the other side now. I still think the debt forgiveness should be pursued through the central bank and the IMF, through European Central Bank and the IMF, and it should be more selective. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I must say it's been as complicated and as thought-provoking as we hoped it was going to be, and it gives us all a lot to think about. For those of us, especially who are not economists, let me just switch this thing off. Oh, yes, it is on. For those, especially those of us who are not economists, you may like to go through the lecture again. We've had it videoed, and we will get it onto the Hellenic Center website as quickly as possible. Also, Professor Pissarides will be here for the next half hour, so those of you who may wish to ask him questions, you may fight each other to get to him. We are now going to have a reception across here, which I hope will last for at least half an hour or so. Before we go to our reception, I'd just like to say two things about the Hellenic Center and what is happening at the moment. Over the last few years, we have been seeing our audiences grow and grow to the point where people are being refused entry. Tonight, for example, we had about 40 or 50 people whom we couldn't allow to come in. As a result of this, we have decided that we are going to be giving priority to members of the Hellenic Center instead of having everything free and open to all comers. So up to a certain time, which we will decide, we will give priority to the Hellenic Center members and then open it to everybody else. I hope you understand that, those who are not members. But of course, you do have the opportunity of becoming members, because on your chairs you will have found the white bits of paper, which are application forms for membership, and I really do hope that a lot of you make use of it. At the same time, we have a traditional Christmas family lunch on Sunday the 7th of December. There are still a few places, so those of you who wish to come will be most welcome. So thank you all for coming, and come and join us for the reception.